Okay, so we are recording. So thank you again, and Spencer, for making this all happen today.
Well, thank you very much for coming.
All right, and Norberto, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for organizing this.
Well, we did it all together.
It is a
Collaboration.
team effort.
Yeah, it's a team.
It's definitely a team effort.
So we're going to talk about Miguel. So I figured we would start off by just talking about him as a person, because some people know of him. I know there's some collectors here, but maybe not everyone. So why don't we start talking about his humble roots in Mexico City?
You want to start?
Sure. It's humble is sort of he was very fortunate. He came from a upper class family, actually. His father worked for the Mexican government, but at that time there was a dozen governments. It was almost every 9 months they had a new president, a new government. Someone or the other was assassinated or removed. But a quality that his father had, and the reason why he survived the length of 25 years, was because he was called the honest one. Clearly with that title, you can get a lot. He refused gifts, he refused bribes, he wholeheartedly worked with his community, and I feel a part of his father, his name was Jose, who Miguel's named after, a lot of that carries over to Miguel Covarrubias, because Jose was also a man who family was important, community was important, the arts were a big part of his life, and he sort of, many would say Miguel is self-taught, and he is. He has his own style. But his father was the one who guided him into drawing. They would spend Saturdays. It was quality time, father and son. And they would just sit in the drawing room and sketch and draw together. Because Miguel was someone who was very impatient. School was not his thing. He constantly had issues with his teachers, issues with anyone of authority. Luckily for him, his mom and his father were very supportive and financially able to sort of guide him. He never finished his schooling, so his father got him a job as a draftsman. And kind of when you look at that period, you can see that whole series he did, these monumental maps that many might recognize or know, these sort of borderless depictions of the topography, the flora and fauna, connection to his father. But through this, he was able to sort of develop. I mean, he was just 14 years old.
Yeah.
By the time he left Mexico, he was already publishing his drawings in many local newspapers and magazines in Mexico. He was already designing theater sets. Mexico is celebrating the centennial in 1921, independence from Spain, and he designed this whole stage production. He also was able to bring in something that was not standard in Mexico at the time, because you have Porfirio Diaz, you have Maximilian. They were more into the European arts, European culture, and so Miguel was trying to reintroduce folk art, folk dance. So by the time he came to New York, at the age of almost 19, he already had under his belt an exhibition of his artwork, his works being published. He loved the theater. Like, you know, the few times he would escape school was to go to rehearsal. I think the theater he used to attend was the Lyric Theater, and that's how he met anyone and everyone in the art field. He also hang out at the cafe called El Monoton, which means the giant monkey. And as a young man of 15, he would find a spot and sketch everybody. That's how he channeled his energy. He loved people. He loved to just place a person on paper or on a napkin or on scrap. And because of that, he met many of the greats, because it turns out that Moneton was also the hangout for Orozco. It was actually Jose Clemente Orozco's brother's cafe.
Wow.
And all the walls were covered in Jose Orozco's murals and drawings.
Wow.
Of course, Diego Rivera was
Yes.
a big part there. Another artist, Luis Hidalgo, who's a caricature artist. His medium is wax. He was the one who sort of helped guide Miguel to focus on his caricature drawings. And so I think for Miguel, he was just enthusiastic. He had this quench for interacting with anyone and everyone. When he met you, he wanted to know about you and everything about you. Almost an obsession.
Well, see, that's what I liked about him. That's what I meant when I said humble. He was this kind person. And he didn't, he wasn't boastful. And he really paid attention, like zeroed in on the culture that was surrounding him, and sketched what, he valued very much. And you could see even how he developed some of these images, because he would repeat some images over time so that he could perfect it. And that's really great because, he didn't think he knew it all. He was willing to learn. And I thought that was a great aspect of his character. So I just want, like Spencer, to jump in to share with us what were your impressions of him as an artist, because you saw something in him and wanted to start building up this collection to share with others.
Well, when I was in college, I studied archaeology for 2 years, and because he was an amateur archaeologist and he loved the relics and finds of Mexico, and he was one of the friends that got Diego to have such a passion for pre-Columbian art, and Frida Kahlo, and he was both friends with Frida and Diego both. And he began to systematically decipher the very first one for Olmec culture because of his books, and he was an avid writer, and he picked up language very quickly. And so when he went off to Bali, within a year he had mastered the language there and was able to do the Bali book. But he was an incredible person to quickly pick things up, and he really in depth understood archaeology, and he categorized the evolution of styles of Mesoamerica, and no one else had ever even attempted to do that, and no one else has since done the graphs and charts to understand that, but he did. And when he came to New York, he was roommates with Saul Steinberg and was very influential with influence in Steinberg's work. They had lived in the village, and they both shared an apartment together. So, and then he met Rosa from going to the theater and to Broadway, and Rosa came along, and they became lovers, and they were married, and since they were good friends with Stieglitz, they were asked to the country and to Lake George, and actually he got married in New York to Rosa. And
1930.
in 1930.
Wow.
And then when they traveled to Paris, Rosa was able to meet Man Ray and in 31, and Man Ray taught her to do railgrams. So she became a very good photographer, and Miguel gave the first camera to Van Vechten and influenced Van Vechten, who photographed all of the people of Broadway and the people of prominence in New York.
Wow.
They were a power couple.
Yeah.
And they were very equal in many ways. That's why they clicked, because they had the passion for art, music. They were gracious. They loved to host events, and their enthusiasm, the two of them together, helped influence. Like Spencer was mentioning how something about his enthusiasm was infectious, and so you can speak and hear stories about how Miguel influenced this person. He influenced that person. It's amazing how his impact has spread wide. That's why most might not necessarily recognize the name unless, depending on what it is that you know or collect or how but he touched a little bit of everything in his short span of.
He did. He lived a short life. He did live a short life. And that moves me towards talking about his influence in Harlem, because he met Carl Van Vechten, and he introduced him to several luminaries in Harlem during the Renaissance. So I was really impressed that he was hanging out with Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, who's my favorite female author of that time, and he was good buddies with W.C. Handy. And we have a book here that talks about their relationship. W.C. Handy's, who was also not just a very influential entertainer, but was one of the first group of residents to live in Strivers Row. And Strivers Row, as some of you know, was built by David H. King and then empty for 20 years after they were completed in 1893. And it took a while, a couple of race riots, that actually allowed blacks to move to Harlem. And the first wave of those who came in were doctors and lawyers, teachers, preachers, but also entertainers like W.C. Handy. So he was hanging out with all of these luminaries. And one of the things, if you go to the Schomburg Center on 135th Street and Lenox Avenue in the bookstore, they have copies of Weary Blues. That was Langston Hughes' book, and he did the illustration for Weary Blues. So it is available if you wish to get the book with the illustration on the jacket cover. So he was like all over the place. Wouldn't you say?
He burned the candle at both ends. And so when he came here through a scholarship and this is something that I've learned as I started reading more of his books, here in New York in the 40s, in between 42nd Street and 48th Street, there was this hub, a Latin community. Jose Tablada, who's a Salvadoranian poet, he had a shop, a bookstore called La Latina on 5th Avenue and I think 46th Street or 47th Street, forgive me if but that area was an amazing amount of hustle and bustle between intellectuals and artists. And of course you can see this in Harlem. I also read somewhere where they called Harlem and Mexico City during the same period first cousins.
Yeah.
They call it a reawakening of a revival of one's culture. And it seemed fresh and new to everyone else, but it was just the community just evolving and everyone coming together and creating. If it's literature or music, this was an exciting time, and I think that's why Miguel
felt drawn to it.
He was drawn to everything, but Harlem in itself was an oasis. It was a place where you could be who you are.
Yes.
Didn't matter your color, didn't matter your background, didn't matter what. And so it represents a lot of things. That's why that period in his career, besides of course the Bali, was so exciting.
Yes, come on in. And I was going to ask Spencer to tell us about some of the works that you have here in this exhibition, because you have some top-notch pieces by Miguel.
Well, we were very lucky to work with Adriana Williams and Pablo Goebel from Mexico City, who co-curated the show with me. And we were able to put together a large body of work, and it covers all the different periods, his Harlem series, his Mexico period, his Bali period, And he also, what most people don't understand too, that as an illustrator, he traveled a lot. So he was able to go to Paris, and then he, in 1932, went to Bali, and in 33 he learns the language, and he comes back, and with Knopf publishes Bali. And it had a huge impact on the painting schools of Indonesia. And he also traveled to China, and he wrote a book on mankind and friendship. And he was also in Japan. So he did a fabulous drawing of Hirohito, the emperor, and
He spoke Chinese and Japanese. He's
fluent.
actually 8 languages.
Wow. That's really impressive.
He could pick it up very, very quickly. He was a really Renaissance man. That's why I liked him, because of his interest in archaeology and art, literature, dance. And then later in life, he designed sets for the Mexican ballet and organized productions for the Ballet of Mexico. And because he had been a communist, he was denied admission in the 50s to New York, which was really very sad, because Mexico Ballet came and did 2 productions here, and he had staged it, choreographed it, but was not able to come.
That's sad.
Yeah.
That's very sad. So tell us about some of the works that you have here, and you also have some new pieces as well.
Well, when he was here in New York, he made his living with illustrations for Vanity Fair, for the New Yorker, and for Town and Country. And so we have an original cover from 1933 of FDR that he did. He also did the Lindsay Hop for his,
Over here.
which is there.
And it's around the corner of the FDR. You can't really see it.
It's over there. And he also illustrated Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Yes.
And we actually have 2 drawings from that book. But his main work was with Vanity Fair. And he did a beautiful series of drawings for Vanity Fair on the Harlem Renaissance.
You know that his first exhibition here in New York was at the Whitney Studio, which is now the Whitney Museum.
Wow.
Was based on his caricatures. And that's the Vanity Fair cover, if you wanted to see.
And I know there was some controversy because even the piece right over here about the fish, catching the fish, a lot of, I would say, prominent Black figures like W.E. Du Bois didn't particularly care for that piece because it seemed too rural. It seemed like it was almost a satire of Black life. But Langston Hughes liked his work, and County Cullen liked his work. And they thought that he was, bringing truth to life, because most African Americans came from the South. And that's what they were familiar with. They understood all of that. In fact, my family came from the South. My grandmother came through the second wave of the Great Black Migration. There was 2. Right after, or rather towards the end of World War I to the Depression. Then the Depression stopped everything, and then when World War II started, the second wave came up. So my grandmother came up, and she worked at the Hotel Edison on 46th Street, in the theater district, and she worked there her entire time in New York City. So there's all these, connections. Why don't you tell us about the Negro drawings, Spencer? Because those are like really, worth knowing.
There are 2 original ones from his book from 1926 called Negro Drawings, which is
We have it here if you guys want to look through.
There is one portrait here, and then there's the Sheik here, who's a dandy in the gray, which we just acquired.
It has the Vanity Fair stamp in the back too. It's
Which
amazing.
we produced
Oh
in
my
Vanity
God.
Fair. Yeah,
Is that of a particular individual?
it is. I don't know his name, but it doesn't mention, you just call him the
The
Sheik.
term chic, oh, you look so chic.
Yeah.
That term, I was looking it up, the slang was a very charismatic gentleman who knew how to dress and was quite engaging to the ladies. Or dandy, or, but you can see how stylish he is just, you should take a close-up.
Yes.
And then we call this one Josephine Baker. It most likely is not her. It could be. We can't confirm it, but she started the whole sensation so that you have a lot of imitations, a lot of shows based on her acts and her dance and her look.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see the motion in that one. And that one's beautifully printed in the publication Negro drawings, because that comes from Rosa Covarrubias' collection. A lot of the works you see here come directly from Rosa Covarrubias, Miguel's wife.
Now, how difficult was it for you, Spencer, to collect some of these pieces?
Well, this is it's been about a 20-year period. I would find one here, one there, and then I mentioned to Pablo Goebbels that I would like to do a show. And of course, since he was in Mexico, I said, research it, and he went to the Americas Museum there and worked with the Barragan Foundation, because Barragan, the famous architect, was the executor to Miguel Covarrubias' estate and had been friends with Rosa. And so from the Americas Society there, they were able to acquire some works, and we did a beautiful catalog, which there are more works than are in the show. The ones that aren't in the show were owned by the foundation of the museum and are not for sale. So, but these are ones that I found over the years and that Pablo was able to find. So it's been a real research project. It took years to
They're
put it
out
together.
there.
They're
He was
out
in New York for 8 years, and he was proficient. I mean, he produced so much. So.
But I think a lot of people, they may know the work, but they may not know the person.
Right.
Yes.
Because that happened to me. I saw the work and I was like, oh yeah, I really like this. Now, who did this? And so his name is not a household name, but the talent, people do recognize when they see the talent. And I think he's kind of getting a little resurgence, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, he has an exhibition right now in Mexico City at the Museum of Modern Art. So he is being rediscovered in Mexico, and but
The
he's
auction
on
records too.
And recently, a beautiful one called the Lives of the Painters was just sold at Sotheby's. It was a small work on paper, watercolor, with Jose Vasconcelos, who was the minister of the Arts Foundation in Mexico, and it has a tree with different leaves, and each leaf has the name of a painter during the Impressionist period.
Wow.
And that little small work recently sold at Sotheby's for $355,000.
Ooh. 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 So
It's
yeah,
a record.
I think
Yeah.
he's on a rise. I think he's on the rise.
I do too.
So one of the things, because we don't want to take up too much time because we want people to look at the works, but I'm also noticing how a lot of his small works are affordable for people. So they can start to build on a collection with his work, correct?
That's true. These are the first times that the ones from Adriana's collection, that was Rosa's collection, have been for sale. So we wanted people to have access to collector's work, because his famous paintings already are out of the reach. His paintings go for millions of dollars, especially from the Renaissance really happened when the work from Bali, because he did a lot of oil paintings for Bali, and those bring over $1 million. And some of his large oils of Mexico have bought over $1 million.
Wow. So I just, before we wrap up, just wanted to reiterate that, this young kid who seemed to have a kind heart came up to New York and explored all of New York City. I mean, whether it's the theater district or in Lower Manhattan or in Harlem, and he just basically documented and kept record of everything that he saw so that we could remember this for decades to come. And I think he needs to be, recognized and applauded for what he did, correct?
Yes.
Very much so. And for his work with Vanity Fair.
Yes.
He organized the first major Latin American exhibition at the MoMA called 20 Centuries, 1940. He brought in all Mesoamerican pieces, pre-Columbian artifacts, incorporated with contemporary artists. Like, it was blockbuster. It took him 4 years to get that here. And
It's
he
called
curated
20
it.
Centuries.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank the two of you for helping me to organize this
Okay.
lovely talk. And we want to have everyone have a chance to ask questions afterwards, to walk around, enjoy the refreshments, if you have any questions. So thank you so very, very much.
The Vanity